The red lights of Mars Station blinked slowly in the darkness of space as Commander Jake Morrison walked through the quiet corridors of the United Earth Defense Force Command Center. It was the middle of the night shift, and most of the crew were asleep or working at half the usual pace. Jake liked these quiet hours when he could think clearly and review the daily reports without constant interruptions from worried officers or urgent messages from Earth. He stopped at his office window and looked out at the red planet below. Mars had become humanity's first real step into space and now served as the launching point for all deep space missions. The orbital station was massive, with spinning sections that created artificial gravity and docking bays large enough to hold the largest ships in the human fleet. Jake had been stationed here for 3 years and still found the view amazing. Lieutenant Amy Watson was working the night communications shift when her equipment started making strange noises. She had been monitoring the usual traffic between Earth ships and the outer colonies when something different appeared on her screens. The signal was weak and coming from somewhere far beyond the normal shipping lanes near the edge of the solar system. Amy adjusted her headset and tried to clean up the signal. The transmission was unlike anything she had heard before. It was not coming from any human ship or station. The frequency patterns were completely foreign, and the mathematical structure was different from human communication protocols. Her heart started beating faster as she realized what this might mean. She quickly called her supervisor, and within minutes, the communications bay was full of technicians and officers, all trying to understand what they were hearing. The signal was definitely artificial and seemed to be some kind of distress call, but nobody could decode the actual message. The alien transmission repeated every few minutes with slight variations, as if the sender was desperately trying different approaches to make contact. Dr. Lisa Barnes arrived at the communications center still wearing her sleeping clothes after being woken up by the emergency call. As the station's only xenolinguist, she was the closest thing they had to an expert on alien languages, even though she had never actually encountered any real alien communications before. She had spent years studying theoretical alien language structures and mathematical communication models that might be used by non-human intelligence. Lisa sat down at the main console and began running the signal through various analysis programs. She started with basic mathematical patterns and looked for prime numbers or simple geometric relationships that any intelligent species might use as a universal greeting. After an hour of work, she found something that made her hands shake with excitement. The signal contained a repeating sequence that appeared to be a distress code. The aliens were using a binary mathematical progression followed by what looked like coordinate information and some kind of emergency identifier. Lisa worked frantically to decode more of the message and slowly began to understand what the aliens were trying to say. The transmission identified the senders as something called the Kethver. They were apparently a trading species whose convoy had been attacked by raiders. Their ships were badly damaged and losing life support. They needed immediate assistance and were broadcasting their location, hoping that someone would hear them and come to help. Lisa looked at the coordinates and calculated their position. The alien ships were drifting somewhere near the outer asteroid belt in a region that human patrols rarely visited. She estimated that it would take at least 6 hours for any human ship to reach them, even at maximum speed. Commander Morrison studied the decoded message with growing concern. This was the first confirmed contact with alien intelligence that humanity had ever experienced. The implications were enormous, and the decisions made in the next few hours could determine how Earth would be viewed by whatever galactic community existed out there among the stars. Jake immediately contacted Admiral Paul Grant at Earth Defense Command. The old admiral had been expecting something like this ever since humanity developed faster than light travel 5 years ago. Earth ships had been exploring nearby star systems, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before they encountered other intelligent species. Admiral Grant listened to the report and asked dozens of questions about the signal and its authenticity. He consulted with his staff and reviewed all available intelligence about possible alien activity in the region. Everything pointed to this being a genuine first contact situation with aliens who needed help. The admiral faced a difficult choice. Earth's military was still small, and most ships were needed to protect human colonies and trade routes. Sending a rescue mission to help unknown aliens would mean taking significant risks with valuable ships and crews. There was also the question of whether humans were even capable of helping a more advanced alien species. However, Grant knew that this decision would define humanity's reputation among the stars. If Earth ignored a distress call from peaceful aliens, it would mark humans as selfish and untrustworthy. If they responded with help, it might establish Earth as a reliable ally, and open doors to peaceful relationships with other species. After 2 hours of consultation, Grant made his decision. Earth would respond to the alien distress call with a full rescue fleet. The mission would be led by Captain Nick Torres aboard the heavy cruiser U.S. Valiant. The medical frigate U.S. Mercy under Captain Kelly Adams would provide emergency medical support. 2 destroyers and a supply ship would complete the rescue force. Captain Torres received his orders while the Valiant was docked at Mars Station for routine maintenance. His crew had been expecting a quiet week of repairs and system upgrades, but instead found themselves preparing for humanity's first interstellar rescue mission. Torres was an experienced officer who had served in the colony wars and knew how to handle dangerous situations. The rescue fleet began launching from Mars Station within 4 hours of receiving the alien distress signal. Each ship was loaded with emergency supplies, medical equipment, and extra fuel for the long journey to the coordinates provided by the HFY. The crews were excited and nervous about making first contact with alien beings, but they were also determined to prove that humans could be trusted to help those in need. As the 5 human ships formed up and jumped to faster than light speed, Jake Morrison watched from the station command center. He knew that everything was about to change for humanity. The rescue mission would either establish Earth as a respected member of the galactic community or mark the beginning of a conflict that humans might not be ready to handle. Either way, there was no turning back now. The human rescue fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the coordinates provided by the alien distress signal. Captain Nick Torres stood on the bridge of the U.S. Valiant and stared at the most beautiful and terrifying sight he had ever seen. 3 alien ships drifted in space ahead of them, and they looked nothing like anything humans had ever built. The HFY vessels were made of what appeared to be crystal or some kind of transparent metal that glowed with soft internal light. They were long and elegant with flowing curves that seemed to dance even though the ships were motionless. Each vessel was easily twice the size of the largest human ship, but they seemed fragile and delicate like works of art, rather than spacecraft. 2 of the alien ships showed obvious damage with dark sections, where the internal glow had died and pieces of crystalline hull floating away in the vacuum. The 3rd ship appeared intact but was broadcasting the distress signal on multiple frequencies with increasing urgency. Scorch marks and impact craters suggested that all 3 vessels had been attacked by weapons that left very different damage patterns than human armaments. Lieutenant Commander Ben Hayes worked at the sensor station trying to scan the alien ships and understand their technology. The readings were confusing because the HFY vessels seemed to use energy systems that human science could barely detect. Their power sources were completely foreign, and their hull materials registered as something between metal and living tissue. Captain Torres opened a communication channel using the mathematical protocols that Dr. Barnes had worked out during the journey. The response came immediately, and the bridge speakers filled with a sound like singing crystals mixed with electronic harmonics. The universal translator struggled to process the alien language, but slowly began producing recognizable words. The voice that emerged from the translation system was melodic and filled with both hope and fear. Ship leader Veltar of the HFY trading convoy expressed gratitude that someone had responded to their distress call, but also concern about who their rescuers might be. The aliens had never encountered humans before and seemed surprised that a species from such a distant region had faster-than-light travel capability. Veltar explained that his convoy had been carrying rare minerals and technological components between star systems when they were attacked by raiders calling themselves the Zephyrian Dominion. The attack had been sudden and overwhelming, with the raiders using advanced weapons designed to disable rather than destroy so they could capture the cargo intact. The HFY had managed to drive off the attackers, but at great cost. Their ships were badly damaged and many crew members were injured or dying. Their life support systems were failing, and they had perhaps 12 hours before the situation became critical. Veltar requested immediate assistance but warned that the raiders might return to finish what they had started. Captain Kelly Adams brought the medical frigate UES Mercy alongside the least damaged HFY vessel and prepared to send over emergency teams. Dr. Ryan Clark led the first boarding party wearing full environmental suits. Since nobody knew what kind of atmosphere the aliens breathed or what diseases they might carry, the airlock on the HFY ship opened to reveal a corridor that looked like the inside of a giant crystal formation. The walls curved and twisted in organic patterns that seemed to pulse with their own light. The artificial gravity was lighter than Earth normal, and the atmosphere registered as safe for humans, though it had a strange sweet smell that reminded Dr. Clark of flowers. The first HFY that the humans encountered was unlike anything they had imagined. The alien stood nearly 7 feet tall, with a thin, graceful body covered in what looked like translucent skin that showed internal organs glowing with soft bioluminescence. Its head was large and elongated, with huge, multifaceted eyes that reflected light like prisms. Long, delicate fingers ended in what might have been claws or simply very sharp fingernails. Dr. Clark approached the alien carefully and tried to communicate using the translation device. The HFY individual identified itself as Healer Shander and expressed amazement at the appearance of the human medical team. The alien seemed fascinated by their robust physiology and the fact that they could function normally in environmental conditions that would be extremely hostile to most galactic species. Shander led the human medical team to the ship's medical bay, where dozens of injured HFY were being treated by their own healers. The alien injuries were unlike anything Dr. Clark had seen before. Some victims appeared to have been hit by energy weapons that caused their crystalline skin to crack and darken. Others showed signs of some kind of neural disruption that left them unconscious, but physically unharmed. The human medical equipment worked surprisingly well on HFY physiology once Dr. Clark figured out how to adjust the settings. Human emergency treatments that seemed crude compared to the elegant alien medical technology actually proved more effective at dealing with severe trauma. The aliens were amazed that beings from a primitive world could provide such effective care. While the rescue operation continued, Captain Torres maintained constant sensor sweeps of the surrounding space. His tactical officer warned him that long-range sensors were detecting movement near the edge of the system. Something large was approaching, and the sensor signature suggested multiple ships traveling in formation. The communication channel with Veltar crackled to life with urgent warnings. The HFY leader confirmed that the approaching ships belonged to the Zephyrian Dominion. The raiders had returned to finish looting the convoy, and would not be pleased to find that someone had responded to the distress call. Veltar estimated that the human fleet had perhaps 30 minutes before the raiders arrived in force. Captain Torres called an emergency conference with his ship commanders. Captain Adams reported that her medical teams had stabilized most of the injured HFY, but would need several more hours to complete the evacuation. The alien ships were too damaged to travel, and their crews would have to be transferred to human vessels for transport to safety. The tactical situation was grim. Long-range sensors showed 12 Zephyrian ships approaching with what appeared to be advanced weapons and defensive systems. The human rescue fleet consisted of only 5 ships that had been designed for patrol duties rather than heavy combat. Captain Kate Sullivan of the destroyer UES Thunder estimated that the approaching raiders outgunned the human force by at least 3-1. Veltar strongly advised the humans to retreat immediately. He explained that the Zephyrian Dominion was known throughout the galaxy as a ruthless military organization that showed no mercy to anyone who interfered with their operations. The raiders had advanced energy weapons and particle beam systems that could destroy primitive vessels with ease. No species in the region had ever successfully resisted a Zephyrian attack. The HFY leader seemed genuinely concerned for the safety of his rescuers and repeatedly urged them to abandon the disabled ships and flee while they still could. He could not understand why a species that the galaxy classified as dangerous Deathworlders would risk their lives to protect strangers they had never met before. Captain Torres looked at the tactical display and considered his options. The smart military decision would be to evacuate as many Kethver as possible in the time remaining and then retreat before the raiders arrived. The alien convoy was lost anyway, and there was no point in sacrificing human ships and crews in a hopeless battle against superior forces. However, Torres found himself thinking about what this decision would mean for humanity's future among the stars. If Earth's first contact with aliens ended with humans running away from a fight, it would establish a reputation for cowardice that might follow them forever. More importantly, Torres could not bring himself to abandon helpless beings who had asked for help. He made a decision that would change the course of human history. The rescue fleet would stay and fight to protect the disabled Kethver ships while evacuation operations continued. The aliens would learn that humans did not abandon those who needed help regardless of the odds or the cost. The Zephyrian fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in a perfect attack formation that spoke of military precision and long experience in raiding operations. 12 warships arranged themselves in a deadly arc around the disabled Kethver convoy with the obvious intention of finishing what they had started. The raider vessels were dark and angular with weapon ports that glowed with menacing energy. Warlord Caxron commanded the Zephyrian flagship from a bridge designed to intimidate prisoners and subordinates alike. The raider leader was a massive reptilian creature with armored scales and claws that could tear through steel. His species had evolved on a harsh world where only the strongest survived, and they had built an empire based on taking what they wanted from weaker civilizations. Caxron studied the tactical display with growing amusement as his sensors identified the 5 human ships positioned defensively around the damaged Kethver vessels. The unknown aliens appeared to be some kind of primitive species that had somehow developed faster than light travel despite their obvious technological limitations. Their ships were crude metal constructions that looked more like projectile weapons than spacecraft. The Zephyrian warlord opened a communication channel and demanded that the unknown aliens identify themselves and explain their presence in his operational area. The response came in a language that his computers had never encountered before, but the translation was clear enough. The humans claimed to be conducting a rescue operation and ordered the Zephyrians to withdraw immediately. Caxron burst into laughter that echoed through his bridge. A species of primitive Deathworlders was ordering him to retreat from his own prize. The situation was so absurd that he decided to give the aliens one chance to surrender before he destroyed them all. He had never heard of humans before, but they would serve as an excellent example to other species about the price of interfering with Zephyrian operations. Captain Torres received the surrender demand and responded by ordering his fleet to open fire. The Use Valiant's main guns erupted with a sound like thunder as massive kinetic projectiles accelerated toward the Zephyrian formation. The other human ships followed suit, and space filled with the deadly rain of metal that Earth's weapons technology had perfected over centuries of warfare. The Zephyrian energy shields absorbed the first impacts, but the sheer kinetic force of the human projectiles caused the raider ships to shudder and shift position. Caxron stared at his damage reports in confusion as he realized that the primitive weapons were actually penetrating his defensive systems through brute force rather than technological sophistication. The human strategy became clear as the battle developed. While the Zephyrians relied on elegant energy weapons and sophisticated defensive systems, the humans used devastating projectile armaments that simply smashed through whatever stood in their way. The raiders found themselves facing an opponent that fought with crude but terrifyingly effective methods. Lieutenant Commander Ben Hayes coordinated the human fleet's tactical response from his position on the Valiant's bridge. The Earthships moved in aggressive patterns that seemed random but were actually calculated to confuse enemy targeting systems while maximizing their own firepower. The humans fought like pack hunters, using teamwork and unpredictable movements to overcome superior technology. Captain Kate Sullivan commanded the destroyer UES Thunder, with the skill of someone who had learned warfare in the brutal colony conflicts. Her ship danced through the Zephyrian formation, launching volleys of missiles and kinetic rounds while avoiding the worst of the enemy return fire. The Thunder's armor was scarred and blackened, but the ship kept fighting with mechanical determination. The second human destroyer, UES Lightning, was commanded by Captain Danny Park, who had built his reputation fighting pirates in the outer colonies. His ship took severe damage from Zephyrian particle beams, but continued to function despite having half its systems destroyed. The Lightning's crew worked frantically to keep their weapons operational, while damage control teams sealed hull breaches with whatever materials they could find. Chief Petty Officer Maya Rodriguez led one of the damage control teams aboard the Lightning as the ship shook under enemy fire. She crawled through twisted metal and sparking electronics to reach damaged power conduits that needed immediate repair. Maya had grown up in the orbital construction yards and knew every bolt and wire in a human warship. Her skills kept the destroyer fighting when it should have been drifting wreckage. The Zephyrians found themselves frustrated by an enemy that refused to fight according to established galactic military doctrine. Most civilized species engaged in combat with formal challenge protocols and ritualized weapon exchanges that allowed honor to be satisfied without excessive casualties. The humans simply attacked with maximum violence and showed no interest in preserving enemy lives or property. Captain Adams aboard the medical frigate UES Mercy continued evacuation operations even as the battle raged around her ship. Her medical teams worked under constant threat of destruction as Zephyrian weapons fire passed dangerously close to the fragile hospital vessel. Dr. Clark continued treating injured Kethver while the ship's hull rang with the impacts of debris from nearby explosions. The Kethver survivors watched the battle with amazement and growing respect for their rescuers. Ship leader Veltar had expected the primitive humans to be quickly overwhelmed by superior Zephyrian technology, but instead saw them fighting with a ferocity and determination that few galactic species possessed. The aliens began to understand why the galaxy classified humans as dangerous Deathworlders. Warlord Caxron grew increasingly angry as his forces failed to quickly destroy the human fleet. Several of his ships had taken significant damage from the crude but effective human weapons, and his carefully planned raid was turning into a prolonged battle. He authorized his captains to use more aggressive tactics and advanced weapons that were normally reserved for major military operations. The tide of battle seemed to turn against the humans as the Zephyrians brought their full technological superiority to bear. Energy weapons that could slice through asteroid began targeting human ships with precision that made evasion nearly impossible. The destroyer Thunder took a direct hit that left her drifting with dead engines and multiple hull breaches. Captain Torres realized that conventional tactics would not be enough to save both his fleet and the Kethver survivors. The human ships were tough and their crews were skilled, but they were outnumbered and outgunned by an enemy with centuries of military experience. He needed to do something unexpected that would change the course of the battle. The Valiant's captain made a decision that his tactical officers considered insane. He would take his heavy cruiser directly into the heart of the Zephyrian formation and engage their flagship in close combat. The maneuver would require flying through a gauntlet of enemy fire that would destroy most spacecraft, but Torres believed that human engineering and determination could survive what alien technology could not. Engineer Alex Turner received orders to push the Valiant's engines beyond their design limits while maintaining enough power for weapons and life support. The ship's main reactor was already operating at dangerous levels, but Turner managed to squeeze even more performance from systems that were never meant to handle such stress. The engineering crew worked with the desperate efficiency of people who knew that failure meant death for everyone aboard. Commander Steve Jordan coordinated the ship's point defense systems as the Valiant charged toward the enemy flagship through a storm of incoming fire. Automated weapons tracked and destroyed missiles while human gunners shot down energy projectiles with reflexes enhanced by adrenaline and training. The ship's armor glowed red-hot from repeated impacts but held together through superior metallurgy. In engineering, the Zephyrian formation began to waver as individual captains found themselves facing an enemy that seemed immune to fear or rational tactical thinking. The human charge toward their flagship was either the most brilliant military maneuver they had ever seen or the most suicidal. Either way, it was working because the raiders were being forced to concentrate their fire on a single target, while the other human ships continued their attacks. Dr. Clark made a crucial discovery while treating injured Kethver in the medical bay of the Mercy. The aliens possessed detailed intelligence about Zephyrian military technology, including ship designs and tactical doctrines that they had gathered during previous raids. Working with the alien survivors, he began to identify critical vulnerabilities in the enemy vessels that human weapons might be able to exploit. The battle reached its climax as the Valiant closed to point-blank range with the Zephyrian flagship, while transmitting targeting data to the rest of the human fleet. Warlord Caxron found himself facing an enemy captain who fought with the same ruthless determination that had built the Zephyrian Empire, but who served a cause greater than personal gain or conquest. The space around the disabled Kethver convoy had become a burning battlefield as more Zephyrian reinforcements arrived to support their raiding fleet. Warlord Caxron had called for additional ships when the primitive humans proved more resilient than expected, and now 18 enemy vessels surrounded the small human rescue force. The odds had shifted dramatically against Captain Torres and his crews, but none of the Earth ships showed any sign of retreating. Single quotes. Ron stared at his tactical display with growing frustration and something that might have been respect. The human ships continued fighting despite taking damage that should have left them helpless wrecks drifting in space. Their crude armor and redundant systems seemed designed for exactly this kind of punishment, and their crews showed an ability to function under extreme stress that few galactic species possessed. The Zephyrian warlord had built his reputation by conquering dozens of star systems and defeating the fleets of ancient civilizations, but he had never encountered an enemy quite like these Deathworlders. Most species surrendered when faced with overwhelming odds, or at least attempted to negotiate for better terms. The humans simply kept fighting with mechanical determination, as if retreat was not even a concept they understood. Captain Torres brought the U's Valiant alongside the Zephyrian flagship at point-blank range, where the enemy's advanced targeting systems became a disadvantage. The two ships exchanged devastating broadsides while their hulls almost touched in the deadly embrace of close combat. Sparks and debris flew between the vessels as armor plating was stripped away and internal systems were exposed to the vacuum of space. Engineer Alex Turner performed miracles in the Valiant's engine room as multiple systems failed under the strain of extended combat. He rerouted power through backup circuits that were never meant to handle main reactor output, while his teams sealed radiation leaks and replaced burned-out components with whatever spare parts they could find. The ship groaned and shuddered but continued to fight. The destroyer US Thunder had lost main propulsion and half her weapons, but Captain Kate Sullivan refused to abandon the battle. Her crew used maneuvering thrusters to keep the ship oriented toward enemy targets while damage control teams worked to restore critical systems. Chief Gunner Pete Morgan fired the ship's remaining weapons manually when the computer targeting failed completely. Commander Steve Jordan coordinated point defense from his battle station aboard the Valiant as Zephyrian missiles streaked toward the human formation. The automated systems had been overwhelmed by the sheer volume of incoming fire, so human gunners took manual control of the weapons and began shooting down threats with reflexes trained in Earth's violent history. Every destroyed missile was another few seconds of survival for the fleet. Dr. Ryan Clark continued working in the medical bay of the UES Mercy while the ship shook under near misses from enemy fire. He had discovered that Kethver physiology was remarkably similar to human biology in some ways, and that many Earth medical techniques were effective on the aliens. More importantly, he had learned crucial information about Zephyrian technology from the grateful survivors he was treating. The Kethver had been raided by the Zephyrians multiple times over the years and had developed detailed intelligence about their enemy's ships and tactics. Veltar provided Dr. Clark with technical specifications that revealed critical weaknesses in Zephyrian vessel designs. The raiders relied heavily on centralized computer systems that controlled everything from weapons to life support, and these systems had vulnerabilities that human weapons could exploit. Captain Adams received the intelligence data from Dr. Clark and immediately transmitted it to the rest of the human fleet. The information revealed that Zephyrian ships had primary computer cores, located in heavily shielded sections near their engines. If these cores could be damaged or destroyed, the enemy vessels would lose most of their combat effectiveness and might even be forced to abandon ship. The tactical situation began to shift as human gunners started targeting specific weak points on Zephyrian vessels instead of simply trying to punch through their armor with brute force. Captain Danny Park, aboard the destroyer, Lightning used the new intelligence to conduct precision strikes against enemy command ships. His weapons officers learned to aim for the small vulnerable spots, where computer cores were accessible to maintenance crews. However, Warlord Caxron was not about to accept defeat at the hands of primitive aliens regardless of how effectively they fought. He had spent decades building his reputation as an unstoppable raider and would not allow a handful of Deathworlder ships to destroy everything he had accomplished. The Warlord activated emergency protocols that authorized the use of weapons normally reserved for planetary bombardment operations. The Zephyrian flagship began charging a massive particle cannon that could destroy entire city blocks with a single shot. Similar weapons on other raider ships powered up as Caxron prepared to end the battle with overwhelming firepower. The energy buildup was so intense that human sensors registered it as a potential stellar event, and automatic warnings began sounding throughout the rescue fleet. Captain Torres realized that his ships could not survive direct hits from weapons designed to crack open planets. The human fleet had fought bravely and inflicted significant damage on the raiders, but they were about to face firepower that no conventional armor could withstand. He prepared to order a general retreat to save what remained of his command, but hesitated when he thought about the Kethver survivors who would be left behind. Veltar contacted the human flagship with desperate urgency as his sensors detected the charging Zephyrian superweapons. The Kethver leader begged Captain Torres to retreat immediately because no ship in the galaxy could survive what was coming. He expressed gratitude for everything the humans had done, but insisted that further sacrifice would be meaningless against such overwhelming power. Torres looked at his tactical display and saw that several Zephyrian ships were preparing to fire weapons that could destroy his entire fleet with single shots. The logical decision was to order an immediate retreat and hope that some of his ships could escape before the enemy finished charging their superweapons. However, the human captain found himself unable to abandon the aliens who had asked for help. The battle reached a critical moment as both sides prepared for what might be the final exchange of fire. Human ships concentrated their remaining firepower on the most dangerous Zephyrian vessels, while the raiders prepared to unleash weapons that could end the fight in seconds. The crews on both sides knew that the next few minutes would determine the outcome of humanity's first major space battle. Damage control. Officer Lucy Campbell worked frantically in the bowels of the UES, valiant to keep life support functioning as multiple hull breaches threatened to vent the ship's atmosphere into space. She crawled through twisted wreckage and sparking electronics to reach damaged air recycling equipment that was critical for crew survival. Her maintenance teams performed emergency repairs with tools and materials that were never meant for combat conditions. Weapons Officer Carl Wright maintained fire control aboard the Valiant despite the failure of primary targeting computers and backup systems. He manually calculated firing solutions while the ship pitched and rolled under enemy fire using skills learned in Earth's naval academies. His gun crews loaded and fired the massive kinetic weapons by hand when the automated systems failed completely. The human fleet found itself facing a moment of truth as Zephyrian superweapons prepared to fire. Captain Torres made a final, desperate decision that would either save his command or destroy it completely. He ordered all ships to concentrate their remaining firepower on the enemy flagship in one last coordinated attack that might prevent the raiders from completing their charging sequence. the UES, Valiant led the charge directly toward the Zephyrian command ship while the other human vessels provided covering fire from maximum range. It was a suicidal maneuver that violated every principle of space combat tactics, but it was also the only chance to prevent the enemy from using weapons that could destroy planets. The human ships accelerated toward almost certain destruction, with the same determination that had brought them to answer an alien distress call. The final assault began as the US Valiant charged directly toward the Zephyrian flagship while every weapon in the human fleet concentrated fire on the massive enemy vessel. Captain Torres stood on his bridge watching the tactical display as his ship accelerated toward what appeared to be certain destruction. The Zephyrian superweapon was almost fully charged and would fire within minutes, but the human captain refused to retreat while aliens who had asked for help still needed protection. Warlord Caxron watched the approaching human cruiser with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. The primitive aliens were launching a suicidal attack against impossible odds, and their captain was leading the charge personally instead of sending subordinates to die while he remained safely in the rear. Such behavior was almost unknown among galactic military commanders who typically valued their own survival above victory or honor. The Valiant's hull glowed red-hot from repeated impacts as Zephyrian energy weapons tried to stop the charging human ship. Armor plating was stripped away and sheets of molten metal and entire sections of the vessel were open to space, but the cruiser continued forward with mechanical determination. Her crew worked at battle stations that should have been abandoned hours ago while emergency power kept critical systems functioning. Engineer Alex Turner had pushed the ship's reactor beyond every safety limit in the manual and was now operating in completely unknown territory where a single mistake could cause a catastrophic explosion. He monitored temperature readings that were off the scale while his teams rerouted power through circuits that were never designed to handle such loads. The engine room was filled with steam and sparks, but the massive fusion plant continued to provide power. Damage Control Officer Lucy Campbell had given up trying to seal all the hull breaches and was now focused on keeping the ship's structural integrity intact long enough to complete their mission. She welded emergency supports across sections where the frame was beginning to buckle while her teams worked to maintain artificial gravity and life support in the areas where crew members were still fighting. Weapons Officer Carl Wright aimed the Valiant's main guns manually as targeting computers failed one by one under the stress of extended combat. He calculated firing solutions in his head while the ship shook under enemy fire and used instinct, developed through years of training, to place shots where they would do the most damage. His gun crews loaded the massive kinetic weapons by hand when the automated systems finally gave up completely. The human destroyers UES Thunder and UES Lightning provided covering fire from maximum range while their own systems failed under the punishment of prolonged battle. Captain Kate Sullivan commanded the Thunder from an auxiliary bridge after the main command center was destroyed by a direct hit. Captain Danny Park kept the Lightning fighting despite having lost half his crew and most of his weapons to enemy action. Dr. Ryan Clark continued treating wounded crew members in the medical bay of the UES Mercy while the ship maneuvered to avoid Zephyrian fire. He had learned to perform surgery while the deck pitched and rolled under his feet and had developed techniques for treating injuries caused by weapons that human medicine had never encountered before. His patients included both humans and Kethver as the rescue operation continued even in the middle of the battle. The medical frigate Mercy had become a symbol of human determination as Captain Kelly Adams refused to abandon her position, despite being targeted by enemy weapons. Her ship was not designed for combat, but she kept it in the battle zone to continue evacuating Kethver survivors, while her medical teams worked frantically to save lives. The fragile hospital vessel survived through luck and the sacrifice of escort ships that intercepted enemy fire. Veltar watched the human attack from the bridge of his damaged ship with emotions that his species had rarely experienced. The Kethver had survived for millennia by avoiding conflict and appeasing stronger species, but these Deathworlders were risking everything to protect strangers they had never met before. The alien leader began to understand that humanity represented Something new and potentially revolutionary in galactic politics, the Zephyrian superweapon, reached full charge just as the UES Valiant closed to point-blank range with the enemy flagship. Warlord Caxron prepared to fire the planet-killing weapon at the approaching human ship, but hesitated for a moment as he realized that destroying such a determined enemy seemed almost wasteful. The pause lasted only seconds, but it was enough for the human captain to act. Captain Torres ordered his weapons officer to fire every torpedo and missile remaining in the ship's magazines in a single coordinated salvo aimed at the Zephyrian flagship's most vulnerable points. The barrage included conventional warheads, nuclear devices, and experimental weapons that Earth had developed for use against hardened targets. Dozens of projectiles streaked toward the enemy vessel while the Valiant continued its suicidal charge. The human attack struck the Zephyrian flagship just as Caxron attempted to fire his super weapon. Multiple explosions tore through the raider ship's hull and reached the heavily shielded chamber where the planet killer was housed. The massive weapon exploded before it could discharge completely, and the detonation ripped the enemy flagship apart from the inside out. Warlord Caxron died in the explosion that destroyed his command ship, and with him went the central coordination that held the Zephyrian fleet together. Individual raider captains found themselves facing an enemy that had just destroyed their most powerful vessel through sheer determination and willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. The psychological impact was devastating for a species that respected only strength and dominance. The remaining Zephyrian ships began to retreat as their commanders realized that continued fighting against such fanatic opponents would result in the destruction of their entire fleet. The raiders had never encountered a species that fought with such complete commitment, and they were not prepared to match that level of sacrifice for what had started as a simple piracy operation. Captain Torres watched the enemy fleet withdraw, while damage control teams fought to keep his ship from breaking apart completely. The Valiant had taken more punishment than any vessel was designed to survive, but she was still intact and her crew was still fighting. The other human ships were in similar condition with massive damage, but somehow still operational through the skill and determination of their crews. The rescue operation resumed immediately, as human medical teams worked to evacuate the remaining Kethver survivors from their damaged ships. Dr. Clark had established treatment protocols that were saving alien lives, while Captain Adams coordinated the transfer of refugees to human vessels that could barely support their own crews. The evacuation continued despite the fact that many human ships were barely SPACEWRTHY. Ship leader Veltar contacted Captain Torres to express gratitude that seemed inadequate for what the humans had accomplished. The Kethver leader had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history, as a primitive species had defeated one of the most feared military organizations in the region through courage and determination rather than superior technology. Moral Polground arrived with Earth reinforcements to find the battle already won and first contact successfully established under the most dramatic circumstances possible. His relief fleet included additional medical ships and engineering vessels that could provide proper assistance to both the damaged human ships and their alien guests. The Admiral reviewed the battle reports with amazement at what a small rescue force had accomplished. The Kethver requested permission to escort the human fleet back to their homeworld, where they would testify before the Galactic Council about humanity's true nature. For centuries, the galaxy had viewed humans as dangerous Deathworlders who should be contained or avoided, but the rescue operation had proved that Earth's warriors were honorable protectors rather than mindless savages. Captain Torres stood on the bridge of his battered ship and looked out at the combined human and alien fleet preparing for the journey to Kethver space. The rescue mission that had started as a simple response to a distress call had become humanity's introduction to galactic civilization. Earth would no longer be seen as a primitive backwater, but as a potential ally worthy of respect and cooperation. The journey home would take several days and would give both species time to learn about each other and establish the foundation for future relationships. Dr. Clark worked with Kethver healers to develop medical exchanges, while engineers from both fleets shared techniques for repairing battle damage. The cultural exchange that began in the aftermath of battle would continue for generations. As the combined fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel, Captain Torres reflected on how a simple decision to answer a distress call had changed the course of human history. Earth's first contact with alien intelligence had established humanity as a species that could be trusted to help those in need, regardless of the cost or risk involved. The galaxy would never again dismiss humans as primitive Deathworlders because they had proved themselves to be something far more valuable than dangerous predators. The stars ahead held infinite possibilities for a species that had shown it possessed both the strength to fight when necessary and the wisdom to know what was worth fighting for.